Hey, greetings, it's me, Daniel, and I just wanted to share with you my thoughts about what a druid is and give kind of a basic definition, what druidry is, and different things like that, because I've noticed a lot of people have questions on that kind of thing. I've had a few people, so I just thought I'd do a video. Before I can talk about what druidry is for me and what it is today, let's talk about what it was anciently. Anciently, druids was a priestly caste among the Celtic people. Celts had a caste system, very much like Hindus and so forth, and the Druids were a priestly caste among them. With the coming of the Roman Empire and then with Christianity, Druids simply, the caste system fell apart, therefore the Druids fell apart, because it was part of the caste system. And so, like I said, so anciently, Druids are no more. That's a fact of history. There is no such thing as ancient Druid. There is no group that can have a direct, there's no direct descendant from that. So the next major group people to really begin to call was the revival Druid movement. The revival Druid began in the 17th century, so it's about 300 years old, and it was not originally pagan, and we're going to go into that in a minute. It was started by mostly kind of as a fraternal gentlemen's club, although they did have like auxiliary organization for females. Most of them did, which so forth, because simply back then men and women groups didn't really always had to be separate because of cultural norms and things in culture at that time. They were very much like the early revival Druids were a cross between Freemasons and Unitarians. What they did was they were looking for a native. This was happening in Britain. They were looking for a native spirituality, and they took the archetype of the Druid and based the spirituality, where we get the Druid revival, and that's the stream of it, Druidry. That's actually what the term Druidry comes from, is the Druid revival. Because ancient Druidism wasn't a religion; it was a priestly class. Druidry, which is modern revival Druid revival, is something based on the Celtic history, very loosely, Druid revival. They took the archetype of the Druids being able to, of being peacemakers between the tribes and things of that nature, and they brought it in as more of a Unitarian spirituality, honoring nature and things like that. The next major group to come along in Druidry was probably the Reformed Druid movement, which began in Charlton College in the United States. Reformed Druidism started as a protest. Charlton College had a mandate that everyone had to go to church, and people were protesting that, and so they literally started a Druid church. And again, they used Druids as an archetype type of thing, and became what they call Reformed Druidism, which is still thriving. And after the college lifted the mandate for that, a lot of people found spiritual mandate and began a new spiritual path, which is called Reformed Druidism. Reformed Druidism spanned what became later known as Neo-Pagan Druidism. This began in the 80s and early 90s, and these were people who either came from Revival Druidry or Reformed Druidry, who wanted to they wanted to have a Druid religion based on the pagan path, not just bits and pieces. We see this in like groups like ADF and the Hedge of Keltrea and different groups like that. They were basing and making a Druid spirituality that fit for the day. Again, Neo-Paganism tends to be even more historically accurate. They tend to draw even more from Celtic, very Celtic, European centric. The next major stream of Druid spirituality is Reconstructionist paganism. Celtic Reconstructionists don't normally use the term Druidism or Druidry. Their priests are called Druids, but they themselves prefer the term Celtic Reconstructionists. They don't even tend to use the pagan, and they're trying to reconstruct the Celtic religion as closely to the original that can be in a modern society. And again, you're going to see a lot of crossover between Revival Druidry, Reformed Druidry, Neo-Pagan Druidry, and Reconstruction Celtic Reconstructionalism. A lot of them cross over, and a lot of people tend to be in the middle. A lot of organizations, like for instance, ADF is probably a cross between Reconstructionist Druidry and Neo-Pagan Druidry. You know, they try to be very true to the Celtic ancestors. They form a very valid, they have a beautiful system. That's not for me, but I do, you know, recommend it for some people. They also ADF actually came from Reformed Druidry, and they kind of have that sense of humor and that lightness about them still, because Reformed Druidry is a very sense of humor. It's not really a religion, it's more of a philosophy. So now we'll get on to Druidry. I practice Revival Druidry. Revival Druidry is a spiritual path of nature mysticism that draws inspiration from the Celts. It is not Celtic, and it is not Druidism, or ancient Druidism, and is not Neo-Pagan Druidism. Although many Revival Druids are Neo-Pagans or Wiccans or Reconstructionists, Revival Druidry is an independent tradition in itself. For me, I want to read from my journal. For me, a Druid, a Revival Druid, is not so much a priest of a particular pantheon, but a priest of nature, of the earth herself, and along with as a natural philosopher, a nature mystic, a seeker of ancient mysteries, a healer, and in some instances, a hedge witch, in the sense of someone who works solitary nature type magic, although not all Druids practice magic. If we look in mythology, Druids were often depicted as magicians and witches, although that's not true anciently. That's, you know, over time, if you see a lot of Irish and Scottish myth, Druids took on that as the sorcerer and the thing. But that's something that's a later adaptation. Originally, they were that priestly class. But like I said, Druid Revival took that closeness in nature they had, that sense of magic, that sense of peace, loving, things like that, universalism, and began to build a nature spirituality. And that's where the term Druidry came from, that it was a spiritual practice, not a religion, although it can be a religion if you choose to make it such. So for me, a Druid is someone who practices, you know, a nature spirituality with, you know, that draws inspiration from the Celts, but not necessarily is. Can be from any religion. Seeks to, you know, promote peace. Seeks to be close to the divine through nature. I think that's something that in Reformed Druidism is very, you know, that's one of the two major tenets is about, you know, seeking religious truth through nature. Revival Druidry, nature. Even in Neo-Pagan Druidism, that nature concept. Reconstructional, I wouldn't really say it was a nature-based religion, but the Celts themselves were very close to nature. They were very close to that kind of thing, and so you will see that in that. So when I say Druid, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a modern spiritual movement that was based on, inspired by ancient practices, but is not ancient in itself. Druidry is a modern spiritual practice. It's probably one of the older modern, what would be called Neo-Pagan practices, although I wouldn't call it pagan, but like I said, it's about 300 years old. Modern Revival Druidry. There's a lot of different Druid organizations you can kind of look them up, but that's what Druidry is to me. That's what being a Druid is to me. So when you know I'm saying Druid, I'm talking about, you know, that nature mysticism, that nature spiritual practice, learning to draw close to God through nature. God is however you source through nature. Revival Druidry works with what Wiccans would call it, the 8 seasonal festivals. Originally, Revival Druidry only worked with the solstices and equinoxes. Then a guy named Moss Nichols came along, who founded the Order of Baldervan Druids, and he took the Celtic festivals and put together and formed the Eightfold Wheel of the Year. Moss Nichols was a close friend of Gerald Gardner, who was the founder, I won't call him founder, but the father of modern Wicca, and Gerald Gardner borrowed the Eightfold Wheel Year from Moss Nichols, who was, you know, that Druid idea. Simply because Gerald said he liked to have more festivals, you know. Gardnerians before that point had only celebrated the Celtic festivals, which are Samhain, Beltane, Lunissa, and I always forget the fourth Celtic festival. Samhain, Imbolc, Beltane, Lunissa were the four Celtic festivals, and then the equinoxes were added in again by the first people to practice the eightfold rule of the year were actually Druids, modern Druids, and that's only been around since probably the early 50s is when Druidry began all 8 festivals. Before that, they only had the equinoxes and the solstices. Reformed Druidry only originally celebrated 6 out of the 8. One a bit later adapted the other 2. And like I said, now Reconstructionist Druidry only practice, for the most part, only honor the 4 major Celtic festivals. They don't do the equinoxes and solstices. Although I do think that ADF, which could be considered in a way, Reconstructionists do practice all 8 because they're more of a modern type spirituality group, just more grounded in scholarship than many other. And that's my basic definition. Blessings.